And now, a Scared for Reals Extra.
Hey, it's Chris O'Neill.
And Adam Perry.
We're going to do an old-fashioned double feature like they used to have in the movieplexes years and years and years ago.
Oh, yeah, going old school. And it's a double shot of Vincent Price.
That's right.
Chris, when was the first time you saw or heard of Vincent Price?
Well, I was at my one of my good friends' house at the time, and I saw a close-up of this weird-looking face, and it happened to be House on Haunted Hill. I probably was 8 or 9. I didn't appreciate the movie as much, but I just actually watched it a second time this past weekend. House on Haunted Hill holds up pretty well. It's very low budget, but man, oh man, it's a treat. And it seemed like you could tell that certain roles Vincent Price really relished.
He owned. Yeah.
What was your, well, you were asking me that. What was the first time, I mean, again, other than Edward Scissorhands, House on Haunted Hill, and then the 10 Commandments.
Yep.
That was another early Vincent Price experience for me. And I was like, wow, Vincent Price, he's still a bad guy. But then I think I was in my teenage years, and I saw Leave Her to Heaven. Did you ever watch that film noir in 1945? He was like the jilted ex-boyfriend, but he wasn't a bad guy.
Oh.
And there was Song of Bernadette. He was kind of a priest, and he played like a best friend in another movie. And it's like you get to see in the 40s Vincent Price playing.
Kind of pops up everywhere.
Yeah, he was a character actor in the 40s, but it was great, seeing him play all these evil roles like Dr. Phibes and all that stuff. And then you watch all of these 1940 movies where he's actually like not a bad guy, kind of pompous in certain roles, but he was never like the evil guy. It seemed like the 50s, it was like a whole new world for him, and he decided to play the bad guy.
Well, yeah, I mean, like he's kind of the good guy in The Fly.
Yeah.
He's on. We talked. One of our first episodes, Tower of London.
Yeah.
He's actually the brother with morality there,
right?
So. But yeah, we're going through this month, and there's a lot of anniversaries. So we noticed that.
Before we dive too much into Vincent Price himself, William Castle was the guy behind the House on Haunted Hill,
right?
And they did a couple of movies together. The Tingler would follow, same year.
Yep.
And this was an interesting time for movie theaters. Again, they're trying to find out how can we get butts in the seats. So William Castle's thing was to have skeletons flying across the theater.
Yep.
Like very famously in House on Haunted Hill. The sound. Obviously, we watched it on Tubi this past weekend. There was no surround sound. But in a theater, that was a huge deal. The sound, the different gimmicky contraptions he would have, like the Tingler, which would come out later that year. Or I think it was either earlier or later, but the Tingler, certain seats would vibrate.
Yeah, so you could argue this is the prototype of what has now become 4D theaters.
Right. There's not a lot of those anymore.
And there's not, but still.
It was a gimmicky thing that lasted for a few years in the 50s. Because I know, I believe John Waters in the 70s did the Scentorama and kind of there's certain smells that would fill the theaters.
Right.
He was obviously influenced by some of these low budget William Castle was just such a ingenious filmmaker producer, know. But yeah, House on Haunted Hill got a Vincent Price, an eccentric millionaire, inviting 5 people to a party he is throwing for his 4th wife in an alleged haunted house type of thing that he has rented. Each guest will get $10,000, which I think 2023, 2024 standards would be over 100,000. So when was the first time you saw this movie? I mentioned I was just a kid watching it at my friend's house. When was the first time you watched House on Haunted Hill?
Honestly, I can't even remember. In my early years of discovering, classic horror, and, it was just kind of one of those staple movies that just popped up, and,
It's interesting because this is the type of movie that Hammer would make.
Sure.
It really would be. And it's not so. There is some horror aspects to it, but it's like a mystery, and it's like who's going to survive? During that craze of, it was kind of it was before the slasher movies. Of who's going to survive by the end of this movie?
Right. It's a big. It's like
very influential movie.
Yeah, it's a big clue murder mystery type.
Right.
I like how this movie starts. How you get to introduced to the entire cast with them giving statements about themselves.
Right.
That was unique. I really, really like that.
Elijah Cook, he's an interesting character actor. First movie I can remember off the top of my head that he was in, the earliest movie is The Maltese Falcon. And he's kind of the one that can kind of see something's rotten in the state of Denmark. He's the one that could, prophetic in a certain way, he can kind of see that even though he's a drunk, he foreshadows a lot of what's going to happen in the movie. He can kind of see into the future a little bit.
Right.
Which I find interesting. The plot thickens as the movie progresses, and there's no real monster per se. There's no ghost. It's Vincent Price's fourth
house. It's like his fun house.
It's a fun house for him. He knows the ins and outs of it.
Yeah.
As far as ghosts are concerned, his jilted fourth wife and the guy she's having an affair with are the ones creating ghosts,
right?
In a theory, and oddly enough, they're the only two that die in the movie.
Yeah, right.
Well, I find that fascinating because I don't think he planned on killing anyone, but those two inadvertently die.
Right.
He caused, I think, one of them, but the other one just fell in and drowned into the acid.
He definitely caused his estranged wife. He was 100% responsible for that.
Well, that's what I mean. That's why he was responsible for her death. But it's quite the film, and again, it was just such a low-budget film. The exterior shots of the house, they were filmed at the historic Ennis House in California, and that was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, very famous guy. He built it in 1924. Most of the film was shot on sound stages depicting the interior of the house in a combination of styles, including an 1890s Victorian with gas chandeliers, and the poster for the film included an illustration of the house in a third style. It's called a Murgo. That's the promotional gimmick. Pulley systems, you got the plastic skeleton and the sound. I mean, William Castle was just such a ingenious filmmaker and producer.
Right.
Paying for money, paying for all that stuff to be in the theater when that premiered. It's like, how many theaters did he do this with, There couldn't be a lot of them across the country.
Of course not. I mean, does he pay for that himself or does his studio pay for that?
I don't know.
So how many theaters get that treatment? Yeah.
Yeah, House on Haunted Hill was originally released theatrically by Allied Artists. And I guess Steven Tyler, your buddy Steven Tyler, was a fan of this movie.
Yeah.
And he said they had a wire and a ghost, came down and made everyone jump out of their seats. So he was a theater goer, and this movie made an impression on him.
Yeah.
I mean, the huge legacy. The main thing that I saw when reading about House on Haunted Hill was that Sir Alfred Hitchcock himself watched this movie. He was impressed by the low budget, and he was like, I'll make my own low budget horror movie, Psycho, a year later.
And that was a failure.
Yeah. Okay. This is a movie that has a huge legacy, and mainly on video. I mean, it was released on VHS in 1985. I guess two major studios have released the film on home video and remastered versions. Warner Home Video released the film on DVD as a tie-in with the awesome 1999 remake, which I didn't dare watch. Did you watch the 1999 remake?
Not even a little bit.
Not even a little bit, huh?
Nope.
I'm surprised at you, Adam. I thought you saw all of these macabre horror movies.
Yeah, I know when I don't need to see a terrible remake.
Well, I mean, it's unfortunate. Jeffrey Rush is a brilliant actor.
Right.
And Famke Janssen, she's always a pleasure to watch. I'd never watched that one. But I mean, it was enough of a legacy that they remade it 40 years later.
Right. And gave it, apparently the remake had a sequel too. Return to House on Haunted Hill. I didn't even know
Was that a theatrical release or was it straight to video?
I have to imagine it was straight to video because I didn't even know about it.
The huge legacy that this film had is so iconic, the original one, not the 1999 one. I'm reading in 2007 that Return to House on Haunted Hill was direct to video and it was widely panned. I guess as of 2017, they were talking about it anyways. They were in development with a prequel to the original, actually being written by Castle's daughter, Terry. Yeah, I guess they were going to make a prequel with her attached to it, but that was 2017, and we're in 2024 now, so best to leave it alone. Again, I've talked about this over and over again. Most movies don't need any sequels to them. Mm-hmm. They really don't. I understood it with Lord of the Rings because there were 4 books. The Hobbit was the prequel, then you had the 3 Lord of the Rings. The Godfather was such a massive book that 2 movies sufficed, but yeah, Coppola had to make a 3rd one.
Right.
At least you got Mario Puzo involved in the 3rd one.
Right.
But most of these movies don't need sequels. I talked about it like they wanted to make a sequel to The Departed. Not necessary.
And like I always say, Chris, it's not.
Well, again, common sense is not common.
Yeah.
And we're getting to the point where people are not showing up to watch these sequels. Mm-hmm. They're literally not showing up to watch a lot of these sequels now. So now they've got to come up with original ideas.
Heaven forbid, right?
Well, the thing I tell everybody is there's a lot of good ideas, but they're smaller independent movies.
Right.
And Hollywood needs to go back and try to come up with some original ideas. But yeah, House on Haunted Hill it is a fun movie to watch. Again, it's on Blu-ray. I don't think they've released a 4K of House of Haunted Hill, but there's plenty of DVDs, Blu-rays. It's streaming for free on Tubi and probably other streaming platforms as well. Mm-hmm. The next Vincent Price feature, fast forward 5 years later, a post-apocalyptic sci-fi horror film based on Richard Matheson's I Am Legend. I think, was the first film adaptation of I Am Legend.
Yep.
The Last Man on Earth. And you got Vincent Price. Screenplay was actually written in part by Richard Matheson himself, but he was really dissatisfied with the result, chose to be credited as Logan Swanson. Yeah, it was actually filmed in Italy, hence the mostly Italian crew and cast. So I actually saw this movie. It was a late night on Turner Classic Movies. It was interesting, but I thought Vincent Price was kind of bland. It didn't seem like he was really into this. Like House on Haunted Hill, you could tell he was having a blast.
Right.
This one, it seemed like it was kind of bland, and it lacked any oomph. I mean, again, it's a good story. I Am Legend is a good, interesting story. The premise is interesting, but it just didn't. By the ending, it kind of fell flat, I thought.
Yeah, but I mean, he's essentially in this movie by himself.
Yeah,
the entire movie.
I mean, there's flashbacks with his wife and everything like that.
Right.
Played by Emma Daniele, and then there's Ruth Collins that shows up later in the movie.
Yeah.
Who could have? I don't know. It just didn't. It lacked any oomph.
Didn't do it for you.
No, it was a good story.
Yeah.
You can't screw up a good story, Adam. You really can't. And it just, the way it was presented, it didn't lack any spark. And unfortunately, I have yet to see an amazing version of this story on the screen. Mm-hmm. Omega Man was, I thought, the best adaptation of I Am Legend. But when did you first watch this movie?
Again, it's goes back to my discovery of classic horror, man. I can't put a time stamp on it. It was just one of those ones I came across and watched.
It's interesting. Anthony Hines, the producer who purchased the rights to this novel, he did it for Hammer Film. Now, I would have loved to seen this as a Hammer production, having Christopher Lee or Peter Cushing as the last man on Earth.
That would have been interesting.
That would have been awesome. I mean, those guys at least, Vincent Price, for the most part, I was just surprised.
Yeah.
Because every Vincent Price performance I had seen up to this point, he had some sort of dynamite in his performance.
Right.
This one seemed to lack, and I tried to look for information on how we felt about the movie, but it just there wasn't a lot of how Vincent Price felt. I mean, maybe because he was the only guy who could speak English. I don't know. Richard Matheson himself didn't like Vincent Price in the role. He felt he was miscast. So maybe because he couldn't speak English, maybe he found out Richard Matheson wasn't a huge fan of him.
Right.
But
without knowing from Vincent Price himself, I mean, as an actor, again, it's kind of depressing to think that you're the only person on Earth. So maybe he purposely tried to downplay it to give it a more sullen, depressed type, feel to it, because again, you are the only person at the time alive.
True, but at the same time, Charlton Heston was great in The Omega Man. He actually viewed this movie. He described The Last Man on Earth as incredibly botched, totally unfrightening, ill-acted, sloppily written, and photographed. Now, I thought the photography was actually really good. The atmosphere seemed good.
Right.
There were some good aspects to the movie. I just, Vincent Price just didn't jive with the role for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, and that's fine. And again, it's, with all due respect to Charlton Heston, I mean, every actor is going to approach something differently.
Oh, yeah. And Charlton Heston overacted sometimes.
So, I mean, again, for one actor to say that it was this thing and the other, and I would have done it, I mean, that's all subjective. Every actor is going to take this role, and, so maybe, again, Vincent Price looked at it, it's like, I'm the only man on Earth. Would I be happy, eccentric, and juvenile, or would I be a little bit more quiet and a little bit more depressed and a little bit more, either way, it clicked with some people, it didn't click with others, and, it's just the way it is. It's, it's, again.
But the fact that we're still talking about this movie 60 years later.
It's left its impact.
Yeah, it has. Again, as far as I know, this was the first time that Matheson's story had been filmed.
Right.
As far as I know, I'm looking around here. I don't see any other part. Again, Hammer had tried to set this up in the late 50s as Night Creatures, which, oddly enough, in early 60s, that was the American name for Captain Clegg.
Yeah.
But Stanley Baker, Lawrence Harvey, they were all considered. Again, I would have loved to seen Hammer take a hold of this. This is something that would have been in their wheelhouse.
Sure.
But it wasn't meant to be. But I think I like this better though than the Will Smith adaptation. Remember that one?
Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah.
That was just so.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who really like the Will Smith version.
Oh, they're making I Am Legend too.
Yeah.
You hear about that?
Yeah, I mean, it made a lot of money. I mean, it was a hit.
But to make it come out 16 years after the first one, it's like, well, again, it's a money grab. That's all it is. And if they do make it, because right now they're just talking about it. I think it started getting into production a little bit, but if it's made, my prediction, it's going to do well opening weekend, and then it may not even make all of its money back, because movies are like $200-something million because of the stars attached to it.
Right.
You have people like DiCaprio, Will Smith commanding $20 to $30 million per movie. It's like, no wonder the films have a hard time making the money back.
Well, again, that's on the studios. If tell these guys that you're not going to pay it. But that goes back to how bad you want DiCaprio in your movie. So it's, I see both sides of it, but as long as you're going to pay, they're going to demand it.
Right.
It's just like it's just like anything in entertainment and business. A perfect example being, and I bring up Kiss a lot, their farewell tour this last year. That just wrapped up. So many people online were complaining and pissing and moaning about how it was the same show, that they weren't doing anything special, but they were making a big deal, but you were still spending your money on it.
Right. Did you ever watch? Speaking of the TV show, did you ever watch the TV show version of this?
No.
I think it lasted for a season or something, or maybe it was a mini series.
Right.
I really don't know. I've lost a lot of faith in this source, because it's just, they have yet to make a really good adaptation. Now, this is interesting. Matheson said that this Vincent Price version was the most faithful of his book, but he called the result inept and used a pen name, as we mentioned. But he thought George Miller directing Harrison Ford would have been a better.
That would have been awesome.
I don't know about George Miller, but George Miller, other than his Mad Max stuff, I have a hard time with his movies. Other than Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome was the weakest. I did like the first two Mad Max movies, and Fury Road was surprisingly good. But I can't think of any other George Miller movies that are like, yes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Can you think of any other George Miller movies that make you, yes?
No.
And Harrison Ford,
I think he would have done well. Yeah,
he would have done okay. But again, my opinion, Christopher Lee or Peter Cushing in that role would have been the best option.
Right.
But again, Hammer didn't do it, so we can't even go past that point.
Right.
It didn't happen.
Fan speculation.
This is interesting. Last year, Waxwork Records released the soundtrack as part of the Rob Zombie Presents series. Pressed in
cool.
Colored vinyl, and it had cool packaging. And there was a special edition Blu-ray release in the past few years as well. So, I mean, this movie does have a great legacy. There are some good things about this movie. And as Matheson himself said, this is the most faithful adaptation of it. It just, I had a hard time with Vincent Price in the lead. It's not that I wanted to like Vincent Price in the lead. I really did, because I've liked most of the movies I've seen with him. This just didn't work 100% for me. And I saw it a second time, hoping that my opinion would change, just so for this discussion. I probably won't revisit it, though. You've probably seen it several times, right?
I've watched it a couple times. It's one of those movies that, it's not an annual watch for me, but if it's on a TCM, I'll keep it on. I'll keep it on the TV and have it on. I mean, it's just like, all the Vincent Price movies. If I see him on, I'll leave it on the TV. It's just
most of the time, I'm with you there. Just this one, I will not revisit this movie. Mm-hmm. I will not do it. So, but hey, if you're a Vincent Price fan, it's worth watching at least once. Don't let my opinion deter you from it. It probably won't anyways, but yeah, it's a Vincent Price movie. If you're a huge Vincent Price fan, watch The Last Man on Earth at least once.
Right. And again, its impact, it's 60 years old this year.
Right.
So which is why, big reason why we're talking about it and giving you a double dose of Vincent Price today, because who doesn't like talking about Vincent Price?
Yeah, I mean, the movie's at least got an interesting story. You can't screw up a good story, but you can only present it less than brilliant. Right. But yeah, Vincent Price, what are your thoughts? Are there some Vincent Price movies that you would like us to discuss further? If you vehemently disagree with my opinions or Adam's for that matter, just comment below, or you can reach out to us through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X. Scared for Reels, easy to find. Thank you for listening.